we invite you on with the premise of doing a postmortem on the trade war, but it sounds like big picture you're saying no, not so. We're gearing up for round two.
I think so, yeah. Typically, they do either a kinetic war or an economic war, but not both at the same time.
We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning.
Are you expecting an recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition. It takes a little time.
Welcome to Is It Bad for the Economy, the podcast where we explore whether Trump's policies are helping, hurting, or just a load of hot air when it comes to the economy. My name is Democratic strategist Kobi. Keeping me honest is the anonymous banker Bill. And we were also joined by the Wall Street Journal's trade reporter Gavin Bade. Just like last time, we got straight into it, forgot to record an intro, so here you go.
Gavin, I think the big question we were just going to ask you is the trade war over, and did Trump lose it?
I think not yet. Maybe we had a ceasefire, so to speak. But I think we're ramping up in the summertime, right? Like we just saw last week, they released what's called the Section 301 report on forced labor and saying that they were going to put tariffs on 60-some countries because they don't sufficiently account or sufficiently prohibit forced labor in their economies. So this is kind of part of the way that Jamieson Greer, the trade representative, wants to rebuild the tariffs that the Supreme Court threw out in February. So they had some temporary tariffs, and then these investigations come out, and they plan to have them eventually result in tariffs sometime in July, like mid to late July, right? And so then you're going to see a lot of these tariffs are going to come back into place. They're actually much more legally durable than the ones before. And so while I think you might see the overall tariff rate might be a little lower than it was in February, there's still going to be much higher tariffs on the U.S. economy than at the beginning of Trump's term. And then you have to see, okay, does that spark retaliation from anyone? Does it put any of these kind of provisional trade deals or frameworks that Trump's gotten kind of strong-armed people into taking? Does it put any of those at risk? There's a bunch of other live issues as well. We're renegotiating the USMCA. This is the new NAFTA, so to speak. We're renegotiating that this summer. That will probably result in higher tariffs and certainly a lot of uncertainty. So we paused for a little while, I feel like, and now we're starting to ramp up again.
Is there a chance that tariffs go back up again to what we were seeing, not maybe for Liberation Day, but what we were seeing in the middle of last year?
No, I don't think so. I think you're going to end up kind of in the middle, right? Between where we were. Certainly, you're not going to see like 150% tariffs on China like we saw last spring. And I don't think you'll see much higher than, 25% tariffs is the biggest that you'll see on most economies. And a lot of them will be 10, 15, or 20%, right? Depending on how much you've negotiated with the administration and what they find in these investigations. And then there's also a lot of carve-outs, right? Like a lot of food and agricultural items are no longer subject to the tariffs. They've been thinking about, do we want to lift tariffs on beef products because beef is near all-time high prices in the U.S. as well. It's summertime, you want to be grilling. But they're kind of flailing about on that. They thought they had the executive orders ready to go to lift the beef tariffs or end the tariff rate quota is what it would have done. And then they get calls from a bunch of cattle state senators and then they back down in the same day, right? So there's kind of a lot of erratic behavior still. I think that they are finally realizing or facing up to the fact that these tariffs do raise prices for consumers. And even if it's not the biggest contributor to inflation right now, they certainly have other things doing that too. It doesn't help to have an extra 10% sales tax on every imported product in this country, right? When people are really struggling. President Trump's approval rating on inflation is abysmal. And even when they do come out and try to talk tough on the tariffs, at the same time, they're kind of hollowing them out for different sectors, right? So not one linear narrative going on here, but still a lot of policy activity.
You already alluded to there's more tariffs coming at the end of July. That's also when the Section 122 tariffs that Trump imposed after the Supreme Court decision, basically what he did to keep something going, those had a 150-day maximum period. Would you expect overall, generally in terms of like the consumer, that the tariff rate would go up a little bit, stay the same, or go down a little bit once we switch from one type of tariff to the next?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The 122 tariffs are temporary. Then the so-called Section 301s would come in and replace them. I expect the overall tariff rate to not change that much. Of course, Trump can do things on individual countries as he kind of wants once those new tariffs are in place, but I don't think the overall average U.S. tariff rate will change much. I think it'll be pretty similar to the 10% that we see under Section 122 right now. When we saw the latest forced labor tariffs, when those were proposed, they put out that report that eventually can result in the levies. Some of them were 12 and a half, some were 10, some were 15. I think you'll see kind of around that ballpark.
On the tariff front, the effective rate, 3 places now, they all have it around 10%. Yeah, I think Yale Budget Lab, Penn Wharton, and the Urban Institute with Brookings there, they all have it around 10%. So I agree. I don't think that's going to change. What I want to know is, reading through your latest contributions to the Wall Street Journal, several things I see is Trump, escalates trade, announces tariffs, and then your next headline a few days later is he walks it back. So how much of this do you think is actual policy and strategy versus a way to manufacture leverage in short interest situations?
I think especially this time last year, a lot of these tariffs were about leverage, right? And trying to get other countries to give us concessions on lowering tariffs or taking regulations off of U.S. businesses, things like that. It's also just kind of the way that they assert themselves as the dominant economic power again. You could call these a form of economic coercion. Instead of using that at the end of a negotiation process or as a last resort, they like to do it at the front end so that they establish themselves as dominant in the relationship. The other country is subordinate. And I think that kind of positionality and making sure that everything's done on our terms is just as important to them psychologically as like any individual policy outcome. And I think you see that because they don't really care about the policy details on the front end. They just want to hit someone first and establish that sort of leverage there. And then they come back and they calibrate these things over time, right? They've had to rewrite their steel, aluminum, and copper tariffs 2 times over. They're on their 3rd version of this now because they just got it so wrong and made it so complicated to comply with that they've had to do it over and over again. There's a lot of technical changes that have gone into that. Tariffs have gone up on some things, down on some things. No one can plan an investment. Everyone's paying through the nose for their materials now, for their metals. And so there's just been a lot of erratic behavior here. A lot of stop and start, 2 step forward, 1 step back. They call this calibration over time. I think it's just that they don't really do all their analysis on the front end. And then they go back and they say, well, of course, that was right then, but now we're going to change it. So, yeah, it's erratic is probably the best way I can describe it.
The idea of Trump calibrating anything is very funny to me. Like regular maintenance, getting regular oil changes. Yeah, Trump seems to me to be a big maintenance guy.
Yeah, well, it's also, I don't know how involved he is in all of these calibrations, right? Because this was a few months ago now, but one of their executive orders on the tariffs, it said that, the Commerce Department and Trade Representative's office, they can go in and play with these rates on their own. They can just put out a statement. They don't need the president to sign an executive order. So I think that was partially so Greer and Lutnick didn't need to keep going to the president and say, sir, here's another order. You got to change the tariffs because, coffee prices are through the roof because we put all these tariffs on Brazil. It helps them to fly a little bit more under the radar. And I think you've really seen that too. Jamieson Greer, the USTR, has a lot more influence now. He's doing a lot of these trade negotiations. He's leading USMCA. He and Bessent are leading the China stuff. And Lutnick's really been pushed to the side because he, quite frankly, just does not know his ass from his elbow when it comes to this trade stuff. And everyone knows that. And no industries want to talk with him. No foreign governments want to talk with him. Greer is now kind of in the driver's seat. And I think that's why you see a much more kind of by the book trade approach right now, even if it is still a pretty hardball approach.
I think there's several things that the administration could spin as positive in their trade spat and how they're conducting themselves, namely that in Q4 2025, the best trade deficit as a percentage of GDP since Q4 of 1998. At 1.6% trade deficit to GDP. I think they'd point to that as part and parcel that their trade strategy, for as incoherent as it may seem to others, as working.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that is one of the metrics that the president really wants to follow. And after we lost 100,000 manufacturing jobs, they did have kind of positive manufacturing job growth in Q1 of this year. Still a lot to make up there. There are a couple bright spots in the data, I would say. But overall, I think what I've been hearing from especially large U.S. businesses, automakers, a lot of people are saying we would be investing a lot more if we had policy certainty around tariffs, if we knew that we could get in big pieces of machinery from specialty companies in Europe or Asia, and we would know what the tariff rate was going to be, or it just wouldn't have a 10 to 25% premium on it, right? There are bright spots in the economy, to be sure. But I think that most people I talk to kind of see those things in spite of the trade policy and not because of it. Maybe you could point to auto assembly jobs as benefiting from the tariffs. They've really been targeted. We saw a new U.S. steel investment, but it's also very difficult to kind of differentiate, okay, how many of these investments were already being planned for years before President Trump's term, and then they just repackaged them to butter the president up and stay in his good graces. So it's tough to know the causality of everything.
Another area I think they'd point to, you mentioned manufacturing jobs. In the total construction jobs in the United States, how about this? As a percentage of all employees, non-farm employees, total persons involved in construction is 5.2%. That's the highest since 2008.
I would say, yeah, construction jobs probably mostly attributable to the AI boom in my mind. And then I think what you also see is a lot of growth in healthcare, not only nurses, but back office staff. And that's not the type of very masculine oriented job that Trump said he was going to create, right?
Also a negative. Yes, the healthcare jobs are often highly labor intensive, don't scale, and don't pay well.
A lot of times they go to populations that this president has not really wanted to target with the benefits of his policies, right? It's a lot of times it's immigrant women.
I got another question for you. So Kobi, last week, we had a short episode. We were just chatting back and forth, and he led me down a road about AI spending and data centers, et cetera. You've been a trade reporter now for a few years. How much of this data center build out do you think would have happened whether Trump gets elected or not? Or how much is it maybe like fracking, where it was going to happen whether Obama was president or not? He just kind of gets credit for it.
I don't see how it would have been a lot different under a Kamala Harris presidency, right? The technology was kind of building and developing under Biden, and still construction costs would be slightly lower because you wouldn't have tariffs on everything. I can't see that there would be much different going on there. The Democrats were getting pretty close to the tech companies during the election too, so I don't think we would have seen any really stifling regulation from them. I don't think a Harris administration was going to really crack down on the tech firms. I kind of see it as the same either way on that. I do think a lot about where is this sector going, and we're going to see a lot of IPOs this year of these AI companies, and it makes me wonder if some of these guys are okay, now it's time to cash out before people realize that this is not going to live up to every expectation people have. But I'm not a financial reporter, and I have a hard time picking my own stock, so certainly not financial advice for me.
Right, and ChatGPT announced they're going to IPO today, right?
Oh, yeah, another one. So I'm is this just, are they I need to take my payout now because AGI is not actually going to happen? Or, they see the backlash growing to their infrastructure at the grassroots, or that's just kind of things that I think about with my own money and with my wife. But I also think that some of the construction spending is good, and they're spending on new manufacturing facilities to a certain extent. But you also see this kind of divergence of manufacturing output from manufacturing employment. And so I think we're starting to see more automation and AI come into that. And that's a really worrying trend if you care about manufacturing jobs in the United States. Manufacturing output did rise slightly last year. It's continued rising, but that has been happening as we've been cutting those jobs out of the economy. And so that, I think, is really worrisome. And remember, manufacturing output is good for many reasons, right? Maybe for your defense industrial base, whatever. But this president promised jobs, good jobs in manufacturing, where the wife can stay home. You can have the 1950s nuclear family. That is just not the economy that's being constructed by this president right now, even if there are kind of some mitigating factors to that.
Well, just to bring it full circle to this trade war for a second.
Yeah.
You said that there was this new round of tariffs coming at the end of July. Did you see that it was based on investigations into the use of forced labor? They're basically claiming that there's slavery in the supply chains.
Yes, absolutely. And this is actually kind of what I think was a clever move by Jamieson Greer. So he's got two different investigations going on. There's dozens of countries, 60 countries named in each of them. One is about forced labor in supply chains. And so a lot of this goes to, well, we think that, the Chinese are using the forced labor of Uyghur Muslims and other minorities. And so we actually have a law in our books, the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, that bans all goods from the Xinjiang region. And you have to go and make, know, if you're importing a t-shirt, you have to make sure it's not made with Xinjiang cotton to the extent you can. Some difficulties in tracking that in compliance. But he's saying, okay, if other countries don't have those sort of similar protections, well, no one likes slavery, right? We don't want our goods made with slave labor, and it's bad for wages around the world too. So we'll tariff them on those grounds. Well, kind of clever, because difficult for anyone to come out and say, well, you know, that's not a good reason to put a tariff. And he'll say, well, what, you're pro-slavery?
But are those permanent? Are those going to be long-term?
Yeah, they'll be long-term. I mean, the 301 investigations, if they do them all by the book and they put them in, they can be permanent. The president can alter them unilaterally. They've got a much longer process on the front end. They're still very flexible afterward. So if you'll indulge me, one is the forced labor. The other one is really interesting too. It's what they call industrial overcapacity. And so this is all related to Chinese industrial subsidies. So, you know, them pouring money into their automotive sector so that they can make a really high quality $10,000 electric vehicle, right? Or cheap loans and cheap financing into the steel sector so they can flood the world with cheap Chinese steel and push everyone else out of the market. This is a huge problem in global trade imbalances right now. The Chinese economy is so export driven. They don't have a lot of domestic consumption. The domestic consumption in their economy can't keep up with the level of industrial output that they need to sustain to keep their society running, basically. And so they have to dump their product on other countries. And so what we're trying to do is identify where that's happening and tariff the countries where that overcapacity kind of seeps through. So say like they ship steel to Vietnam and they roll it and they say it's from Vietnam instead of from China. Well, we would say we want to prevent that by putting a higher tariff on anything. Anyone who is kind of complicit in this industrial overcapacity. Again, a very technical thing. This is something that Jamieson Greer would come up with, certainly not Howard Lutnick. And hard to argue against from a conceptual standpoint, because everyone understands that this is a big problem in the global economy.
Kobi and I discussed this in December 2024, maybe January of 2025, where I actually had said these types of tactics would be more politically palpable and economically viable. And what Kobi came back with was, but Will, there will be a nothing burger in terms of revenue. Is that still true?
You know, I have to look at the revenue. We'll certainly be bringing in hundreds of billions of dollars a year. It won't be as much as under the IEPA
These
tariffs.
specifically, ones that are like about forced labor or basically up the supply chain dumping, right? We're going to allege that the tactics of certain sovereigns to invest in their capacity or industrial base at below rates is a form of dumping. That's what it sounds like.
Basically, yeah. And we do have anti-dumping and circumvention laws already. Those are highly technical investigations, and they really want a premise to kind of do things a lot faster and more unilaterally than having to do an ADCVD investigation, right? So I think you will still see a high, not an eye-popping, but a significant revenue number coming from these, just because they will be so broad-based. You'll see dozens of countries getting thrown into this. And so by the time they're done, they're going to cover almost all of U.S. trade. So it's basically going to reconstruct the global tariff that he did under IEPA, right? So there will still be a lot of revenue coming in from these. Now, I mean, is it going to pay for his $1.5 trillion defense budget proposal? No, of course not. But it's definitely going to be something. And I think that's certainly something that he likes to tout, even if it's not going to really solve any budgetary issues.
Well, the slavery one, I agree. That one's going to be hard to fudge, to push back. But with this over surplus thing, I mean, can I already say that the Trump administration is completely fudging the numbers on that to do whatever they want? Because we know they're not going to do that in the way where if Mitt Romney did it, I'd have to hand it to him. But it's the Trump administration. Let's not pretend like they're ever going to do this in a legitimate manner.
Yeah, I mean, we'll wait for the report to come out. I do think that certainly having Greer in the driver's seat on this will make it more by the book than it would have been otherwise, and certainly much better supported than the diagram of IEPA tariffs from Liberation Day, where they just like plugged it into ChatGPT or Grok or something, right?
Why?
Well, just because I think he cares much more. He's just a better policy technician, actually cares about this stuff, has a little bit of experience here, and he wants these to be durable and stay. Like, Jamieson Greer is a true believer on this stuff. He really wants to be able to say that, oh, the next administration isn't going to take these tariffs off because they're so airtight. Now, there will still be parts of this where a lot of it will be a pretext and it'll come out at the rate that Trump wants and whatever, but he will have a good explanation behind it because he's the most competent of the people in there.
That's what we said about Bessent. And then Liberation Day happened anyway.
That's true. I don't know how much Besant was driving the boat on that, but I do think they are getting a little more
No,
sophisticated.
but they're always driving the boat when it's the adult in the room decision, and then it's always Trump. It's the game.
You're not wrong. Banker Bill, to your question, I just couldn't remember the number exactly, but actually Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget said the new tariffs could raise almost $1 trillion over the next decade. So that's not nothing. Those new Section 301s, $980 billion over 10 years. The ultimate figure will be a little different, but that's kind of the ballpark we're talking about.
So it's an incremental $100 billion a year, or is this different from the other tariffs? But even if it is incremental, we're running $1.5 trillion deficit.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they dot every I and cross every T, I think this winds up just like the Bush steel tariffs with the WTO and China, where it goes out of it anyway, and we're back to square one, and that's why everybody's pissed. I mean, that's the pretext for so much of this, is the inability to enforce worldwide rules on the Chinese and how they have gone around or observed technicalities, et cetera. That's how we basically got to the current trade policy.
Yeah, and their solution has just been to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, we don't care about any of those rules anymore. We're issuing the rules. Everyone else has to follow them or they're going to get hit. The one exception to that is really China, because we tried to coerce China and make them do what we wanted economically. And they said, well, we have levers of our own. We'll put tariffs on you. We'll cut off the supply of rare earth magnets to your critical industries. And we had to turn back from that. I mean, the biggest about face, the biggest shift in Trump's trade policy has been on China, because when we could not coerce them, that's when the administration had to pull back. And then they get very erratic. They don't know what to do. If they can't prove themselves to be the Leviathan, then they get into this weird, erratic deal-making thing where we're doing a deal, maybe Chinese will invest here, maybe they won't, maybe I'll do more tariffs. They get very erratic and don't know what to do. It's kind of akin to what you see happening in the Iran situation right now, where, okay, we tried to really coerce them militarily. We couldn't get all of the objectives we wanted, and now, is there a deal? Are they firing at each other? It's different every day. And I think that's just what happens when they don't quite know what to do next.
I think they bring up the point that no matter how it's portrayed, their stance with the Chinese has been successful. Look, the trade deficit in nominal terms with the Chinese has moved from $40 billion to $20 billion. That's 2006 levels. They would tell you trade war with China won, right? Their goal was to reduce trade deficit. So they've done that.
No. What are you talking about? They told us that they were going to 100% close the trade deficit and that would allow us to go back to single income earner households.
None of that happened.
They brought the trade deficit down a little bit, but, a lot of that is
the trade deficit with China is down. The trade deficit as a percentage of GDP is down. Right. So they tell you two metrics right there.
No, well, those are two very different things. I think you're right that the trade deficit is down dramatically with China. Globally, it's statistical noise.
Yeah. It could be, but they would claim that as a victory. Are you guys aware of the rise of U.S. trade with Vietnam?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so how much of that increase in trade with Vietnam do you suspect, or do you really think is just passed through from China?
I think there's a good amount, and this is something that Greer has tried to address. There's actually a provision in that trade agreement, although it's not a legal trade agreement. But the thing they signed with Vietnam and with Cambodia and with Thailand, they all have these little provisions in there that say that the U.S. can double the tariffs on all of these Southeast Asian economies if they find that there has been tariff circumvention. Now, we have not activated any of those. We haven't even really finished negotiating those rules. So what amount of Chinese content in a given product would be too much? They've not worked out any of those rules. And Greer has told me, oh, well, we know what we want it to be. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. That was this time last year that he told me that, though. So they have this as an idea. They know that this happens, but very difficult to prove and very difficult to go out and say, okay, well, if you do it to one nation, you kind of got to do it to a bunch of them because, the products can flow to different countries. They even want to increase tariffs if, like, a Chinese company goes and builds a factory in Vietnam. Ideally, they don't even want Chinese firms doing that, but that's very, very difficult to enforce. And so you haven't seen them actually make a ton of solid progress on that yet, but at least it's on paper somewhere.
The United States has something like ambassadors not placed in 90 countries that China does. Okay, so China has diplomatic assets and people on the ground in 90 odd countries that the United States doesn't. What else do you need to know about trade? I can give you any favorable data point. but that trend will not be your friend.
And, obviously you can pull out a couple statistics that look good for them. The trade deficit, maybe there's some construction numbers, but overall the economy is not doing very well for the people that they said they were going to benefit, right? Prices are higher.
The middle 80.
Inflation's outpacing wages. And they say, oh, this is all because of the war. Well, yes, but you knew this, like any sane person knew this is what would happen if you tried to go to war with Iran. And this is your policy as well. You can't just say, oh, well, if it weren't for this thing, it's not some extraneous event. You know what I mean? This is what you did. It's part of your economic policy as well. And so I just think things are not going well for that middle 80%. And you can say, oh, the trade deficit with China's down. Okay, yes, but at what cost? I think that's why people don't rate them very highly on the economy. And that's why they're going to struggle this November.
Well, I guess we're losing Banker Bill here in just a second.
That was a political comment out of our trade reporter. Okay. We should expand on that more when we can. But Kobi, back to you.
Well, I want to give Gavin an opportunity to ask you a question.
Banker Bill, obviously the stock market is one of the only bright spots here. I wonder how you and your colleagues are thinking about the next 12 months. I'm starting to get a little jittery about AI bubble and just how concentrated the gains are in the market. Am I just being a nervous Nancy, or how are you guys looking at that?
I think in the banking space, risk management's pretty prudent. I think still with the elevated, rather high interest rates that we have, companies are prudent on how they're allocating their capital. It's a good thing because it's manifesting itself in, the CFO or the C-suite of a small, medium-sized business, say a 500, 1,000 person business. They're only funding their top 3 ideas. Those are the ones that get the investment, right? The incremental 4th, 5th best idea doesn't get any money. And it's because the hurdle rate's not too high with the interest rates, coupled with it the uncertainty. So to hold more cash back. Maybe my anecdotal experience plugs into what you're saying, that you've heard companies say, hey, because of this trade stuff, we haven't been able to invest more. But actually, I'll have a comment on that, but does that answer your question?
Yeah. Can you tell me what your comment is on that?
So if there were no tariffs, would inflation actually be worse? Because with the immigration policy they have in place, there'd be even more demand for labor that's not there. Even more demand for investment in construction spending and infrastructure spending that's not there. And that the tariffs are now a growth drag on what is otherwise a pro-growth agenda. So, they're talking out both sides of their mouth.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. I like the counterintuitive takes like that, but at the same time, you're containing inflation by strategically raising prices on some goods, which is counterintuitive, but I can see how that could go.
Oh, otherwise, cash flows are good. Earnings continue to be there. And people and end customers continue to spend. It's not real. It's not really on credit. A lot of it is with retained earnings.
Yeah.
Money that's coming in gets reinvested.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask about, we ran a big thing about credit card delinquency rates a couple of weeks ago, and people at the White House were getting asked about it. And I see car repos are way up, right? Credit card delinquency way up. It seems like the middle to bottom of the economy, people are really kind of over leveraged.
It's very tight for most people, generations of Americans who have learned very well to run their lives on credit. Okay. Where now interest rates are higher than they've been in their working lives, say for the last 20 years, they're now having a really hard time figuring that out.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Credit card delinquencies are still below, they don't really trouble me. I think those are pretty well contained. Delinquencies in mortgages are well contained. That's where a lot of people have their equity built up, is in their house. Even if housing prices from right here where we stand today drop 30%, what is that nationally? Still plus 15% or so versus 2019. So people would still have reasonable equity in their homes if you bought back then, which a lot of people did. And that carried through to the high prices we see today. But yes, the credit picture makes it very hard for the middle 80.
Yeah. Interesting.
At this point in time, do you really think the balance of that is shifted towards interest rates versus low wage growth?
I think they're connected. To what Gavin said, the money's going to the capital investment, to productive investment, where you're seeing manufacturing, capital-intensive industries take more capital, be even more productive, and create even fewer jobs on a dollar for dollar basis. Whereas the only jobs that seem to be creating, increasing, right, are ones that are labor intensive that you can't scale. And those don't pay well.
Yeah.
Low hire, right? Low fire environment reduces dynamism in the labor market, so that someone who should be in a better job but isn't quitting, but otherwise would have got fired, isn't getting fired. And then another person who may have been better at that job takes it, right? You're not having the natural economic friction you're used to seeing in unemployment. So that's also stagnated. Very interesting stuff that's going on. What you see in investment picture versus labor market, and how it's crazy that Knicks tickets are so much money and this that. But guys, people are paying it. They're paying. They're going to go to the game. It's going to be $4,000 and they're going to pay it. Coming from somewhere.
Any last thoughts for us, Banker Bill?
No, you guys are going to keep chatting. Go ahead.
Well, losing such an important part of this, losing Banker Bill. But I think if I could keep you for a couple more minutes, obviously for us Democrats right now, the number one issue is data centers. And what I see here is a populist wave that's quickly running away. I think Democrats obviously are being forced to jump on this wagon. We saw Janet Mills, of course, sort of announce the end of her Senate candidacy by vetoing a data center building ban in Maine. Other places are having that fight on the more local level. I originally had been hoping that this would be an opportunity for the Democrats to lead, in the sense that if you take sort of the AI revolution piece out of it and you just focus on the local infrastructure parts of it, every locality is right not to trust these companies, that they're going to take care of that stuff based on how other companies, especially the big retailers, have been treating localities for decades and decades. But on the flip side of that, every single bad infrastructure problem of data centers is solvable with money. They can just pay for more power production. They can pay for a cooling system that's not going to draw resources from the community. They can pay for better land that's better suited for those kinds of things. And so I'd really been hoping that there would be sort of a way for Democrats to step up and say, here is our framework for guaranteeing that no data center is going to get built in a city where it's not going to be worth it for that city, and a tax revenue model that made sense for data centers. So you could basically say, we're not going to be pro or anti-data center. We're going to be like, you're not going to get screwed no matter what by data centers. That moment, I think that moment is passing. There's this clock ticking. If the data centers don't get built, then all the circular investing comes crumbling down. Do you really think that there is a dip, recession, big negative thing that we all feel that could happen if this data center pushback gains momentum and we see a situation where in Q4 there is no new data center construction or some big milestone like that, where basically it is halted?
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of, right? And I don't know. I'm not financially savvy enough to really know a lot about these companies' books, but it does seem like, and of course they're not public yet, so very few people do, but it does seem to me that there is a lot of what you might call circular deals going on here, where you're the lender and also the customer of a company and stuff like that. I feel like that stuff just makes me nervous as a layman. And then I know that certainly the industry, the big tech companies and their proxies in Washington are very concerned about that. And obviously you don't want to spread any sort of acute anxiousness around the city, but certainly will warn people that, if we don't build these things, could kind of all come crashing down. I also think that there might be technological fixes. I mean, people have talked to me like, oh, eventually the data centers are just all going to be in space.
No, stop.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
I'm out on space data centers and I'm out on humanoid robots.
That'd be fine with me. But I also think that there's just kind of a sentiment that all of this stuff is moving very fast and it's not really benefiting people. And you can make up a weird song on some AI song app or like a video or something, but it's not worth having, a big loud facility in your town or, in your backyard, or certainly not worth the power prices that people are paying right now, which are, I think, a big issue in the DC mayoral race that's going on right now. Like in every jurisdiction, every state seems to have really, really high utility rates. So yeah, that's going to be really tough. It's interesting that you would say that you think it's the number one issue for Democrats. You think that's on a national basis?
I think number one issue is probably not the right way of putting it. I think sort of
but it's a big one.
Price of gas. But I think in terms of the decision that Democratic campaigns are making right now, the issue that they're trying to figure out, what's our policy on this issue. Maybe corporate money would come in if we supported the data centers, but those people all made their bet with Trump. Like we talked about in our first episode, they like being able to pick up the phone and giving them a call. But it's actually the unions. The unions are the big ones who are saying, hold up. No, we'd like to hold up on these AI development center bans.
Yeah.
The electricians and those folks, they want those
building
jobs.
trades.
And it's funny because you get into these conversations and somebody will say all the job creation is temporary. And they're like, well, yeah, it's construction. Like technically that's true for every single project that we work on. It seems to me that this is turning into an absolutely crazy flashpoint politically because it's the only pivot point that people feel like they have in order to slow anything down that's happening in this country that they don't like. And then at the same time, if you talk about it mechanically, like that's just true on a level that it is not true on any other issue. I don't think we've ever had an issue where people yelling at a city council could actually make or break an entire industry
and potentially take down the entire stock market with it. Well, then there's the other variable is this: if things start to go south, if it happens under President Trump, does he allow that to happen, or does he just start taking stakes in some of these AI companies when they start to struggle, and then you kind of have a semi-nationalized AI sector? Because he's not going to want to see the market tank. He loves to increase his personal political control over the economy by taking these stakes in companies. And they've already done that so many times that I think it wouldn't be seen in the White House as that big of a step. After you've done it with US Steel, you've done it with these critical mineral companies, you own part of Intel now, especially if it keeps a lot of your contributors very happy. Intel stock did great. And so that's the other variable. Do we think he would actually allow something like that to happen? I think that they would try to do something, but, could even the US government contain the contagion if it does get to that point?
If it comes to that, I think there is only one president in the history of the United States. I think there's only one politician alive in this country today who not only would but could do that. A Democrat would never get away with that because people would be screaming communism, and no respecting neoliberal Republican would ever do that because the corporations wouldn't let him. I absolutely see a world where he nationalizes some of these companies and starts building data centers. People have been talking about Kevin O'Leary's data center in Utah, but have we gotten to the point where you could have like 4 national data centers?
I don't know. I mean, it'd be pretty big,
Right.
And I think the power needs would be so great as well. The energy and utility sector stocks are doing great right now because this has been, kind of propping them all up. I don't know how that would scale, but I don't think he would hesitate if he thought he could, because all of this is kind of a personal power play for him as well, right? He's not doing these things out of some sort of ideological predilection towards state ownership, right? It's that, I get to say what goes, then I get to call the shots. And I think that he would love to do that with these new age tech billionaires and insert himself as the alpha dog, just kind of put them in their place and say, you may be Elon Musk, you may be a trillionaire now, but I still get to tell you what to do. I think that would be a really bitter pill for these new age enigmatic tech billionaires to swallow, because they, like Trump, are extremely hierarchical thinkers and are at the top of these organizations where they have almost complete control and whatever they say goes. The political economy of these tech companies, I think, is very similar to how Trump's White House works. I think that's why they are so simpatico in so many ways.
Great point. Don't ask for permission, just go fucking do it and we'll figure it out later.
We're moving fast and breaking things. We're going to tariff everything, and it doesn't matter if we take it off the next day, whatever. You just blast through and, yell at anyone who points out that you've made a mistake. Like that, If you caught a lot of these people in a moment of honesty, they would say, yeah, of course this is what we're doing, and it's good. And you know what? Of course we're coercing people. And that's good because we had such a bad deal for so long. All the politics is power, and none of these niceties mean anything. Every interaction to them has to be hierarchical. There's no sitting down as individuals or as nations on equal footing, right? If you're doing that to someone like Trump, then you are already giving them a concession, because if you are more powerful and you don't assert yourself as dominant and make sure that they are rule takers and you're the rule maker, then you're already getting taken advantage of. That's what they're talking about. It's not just the trade deficit numbers. It's that, we can make them do what we want, but we don't. And that means that we're losing. We constructed that system. We gave concessions. We would cooperate. We would not coerce people as much, because that won us consent to have a global system with us at the center. And they were saying, well, that's all bullshit. Instead of being a consent-based global trading relationship, we're just going to be the global Leviathan, and we will make the rules. And if you don't follow them, then we'll just hit you over the head. We'll destroy your auto industry. That doesn't work with everyone, right? We said with China, it doesn't really work. Then they have to negotiate. But I think at the core, that's the id of Trumpism. It's kind of like an authoritarian personality complex. You need to establish everything as a hierarchy and make sure that you are at the top. And Trump's the big guy at the top, and he dominates over everyone else. But at every rung in the ladder, people have fealty to the next rung, and they dominate over the people beneath them. It's very much like a tech company. It's very much like a cutthroat Wall Street firm, maybe like Donald Trump's real estate firms of the past. I've been thinking a lot more about that to to try to kind of understand why do they do the things that they do and why is it so confusing for people. I mean, like European diplomats and stuff are completely aghast at this because this is just not how you are supposed to do things in the post-war era, right? We made all of these institutions to protect smaller, less powerful parties from overt coercion. That's what the UN is about. That's what the WTO was about. And they just say none of that stuff is worth anything. It's just the politics of coercion with them. And I think that that's going to continue at least until Trump's out of office. I think that we may have kind of turned a page in U.S. politics, and I don't know if we'll go back to a less coercive approach, or at least not very quickly.
Well, I think applying that rationale to the data centers explains what's going to happen perfectly. We're going to get to the point where we find out who's more powerful, Trump or Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Right now, I think we'd all assume that Trump is more powerful than they are, that they would bend to his will just because of what we saw with Elon Musk. Bezos, too. I mean, Bezos.
Yeah.
Is completely supplicating himself to Trump right now. Banker Bill was speculating it's because Blue Origin needs to catch up with SpaceX.
Yeah.
But the reason why I say this is going to come down to who answers to whom, Silicon Valley and Trump, is because I think the populist backlash to the data centers is bigger even than the anti-vax thing, right?
Yeah.
And with the vax thing, we saw Trump really want to push back against that, really want to brag about the vaccine, do a victory lap about the vaccine. But ultimately, he answered to the people on that one. It's sort of one of the two times that he's not gone through with his ideology and sort of bent to the will of the people a little bit.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's going to be a moment where he weighs in on the side of no more data centers just because his populism feelers started tingling again.
Or they feel like he needs to do something. I mean, it's amazing to me how many times they seem to shoot themselves in the foot and just all of his comments. I don't care about the economy. He's just obviously not focused on what's going on with people's everyday lives. And I think that that's why he and his people are really struggling. I mean, how are you feeling about Sherrod Brown, right? Like his poll numbers against Houston are pretty good. I don't think anyone gave him a snowball's chance of winning that seat back, but he very well could be back in the Senate, right?
We're seeing encouraging numbers across the board. I've been seeing encouraging numbers for so long that I'm just getting nervous out of force of habit. Always run like you're 5 points behind, baby. So I'm not saying that that's giving me any sort of confidence, but yeah, it's unbelievable what we're seeing.
How do you feel about the Michigan Senate race?
I don't have any specific insight into the Michigan Senate race, but from what I've seen, I would not want to be a Republican running for Senate right now.
Yeah. The Mike Rogers people, when I met with them, were pretty confident. But I think if you can't beat Alyssa Slotkin when Trump is on the ballot, you're going to struggle when he's not.
I completely agree with that. And I think what my impression from folks on that side of the aisle right now is, well, we still got the culture war ace in the hole. Oh, at the end of the day, we're still going to scream trans people, and that's going to do just enough to stem just enough bleeding that we're going to be able to survive this. I think the plan for Trump right now is go to MSG, talk about booing at MSG for a week, then get into World Cup and just hope that people get tired of Iran the way that we got tired with Epstein, right? We've talked about Howard Lutnick, and I haven't even brought up Epstein once, even though he bribed Congress not to bring it up. The culture war is what you use to define a candidate who can't define themselves. And the problem wasn't that Kamala supported trans people. It's that when Trump said she supports trans people, not you, people believed that she was not going to fight for them like she was going to for pet liberal groups. It's a lame duck situation. That's why we see people like MTG and Massey and Tucker Carlson already planning their exits. And then the third thing that we should need to bring up is that all the legal shit that they're going to do to mess with the election.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about all the redistricting too. How is the math shaking out with that? I mean, are they going to be able to redistrict enough seats to maybe keep the House? I don't know, because like after all the court decisions and VR being thrown out and stuff, like what's the count right now on this code?
The safe prediction would be narrow Democratic majority. I think they've definitely clawed back a handful of seats. And I think the blows in Missouri and Virginia were pretty devastating. But we're seeing a huge enthusiasm gap. I mean, the turnout in the Texas Senate runoff were abysmal. And this is definitely feeding that enthusiasm gap. Now, a lot of folks are going to start talking about dummy manders, that there is going to reach a tipping point where Democrats are so popular that some of these gerrymanders backfire. I wouldn't get excited about that. But it is so bad for Republicans right now that is in play, that is a relevant scenario to play out. It's not looking good. But, Trump is the ultimate escape artist. We'll see what happens here. But I'm really scared of how many votes are going to get lost in the mail, what they're doing in LA with Pratt. I'm really concerned about that side as well. The fact that we have sort of crossed this threshold where they're now throwing ballots in the trash.
Where's that happening?
Louisiana.
Oh, really?
Remember where they paused that primary after the Calais decision?
Oh, yeah.
42,000 people had already cast absentee ballots.
Yeah.
It's like there are congressional candidates who are running right now who don't know whose votes they're trying to earn. Like, I don't care how you feel about racial gerrymanders. I don't care about how you feel about voter ID laws. It is too close to election day. You think SGA is bad flopping in the NBA? You think like I would make fun of the Italian national team in the World Cup that they're about to flop, but they didn't even make it. Okay. Like the flopping you're about
That's enough of that.
is nothing compared to the playing the refs that you're seeing from Johnson and the Republicans. I mean, it's unbelievable, but it's so cynical when the price of gas is what it is.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, it's usually, especially off year elections, it's usually the economy stupid. So, and it's just not that great for folks. So I've got a lot of other election stuff I can ask you, but maybe we should just do another.
We love having you. Thank you so much. Your past episode was definitely one of our best. We're excited to see this one pop as well. Let me ask you one last question while I have you.
Yeah.
I have a sense of Lutnick.
Trump buddy. Yeah.
Yeah. President was deeply serious, is very much playing the game right now. Not afraid to pop a fool.
Not afraid to pop a fool. Yeah. I wonder how he's taking the Pulte stuff, because remember, there was that Politico article. I think it was my long lost cousin Rachel Bade wrote this, I think, where like they were at the executive club or something, and like Bessent was like, tell Pulte, like, we need to, like, let's step outside. It's like, I'm gonna kick your fucking ass. Like, almost came to blows. There's been a couple different times with this, so we're trying to figure out, like, what's this guy's deal? Is he just got a bad temper? Is he overcompensating because he knows he's the out member of the cabinet and he wants to be macho? But remember, he shoved Elon in the hall and called him a fraud or something, and yeah, I don't know. He can be spiky, and Greer can be spiky too. But yeah, sorry, you're asking a question about...
Of all the surprises of the second Trump term, him having a gay enforcer in a tuxedo was like not... I knew Bessent was a fraud simply for wanting to join the Trump administration. I didn't think he'd be the one who would come to blows. But Greer, what's Greer like? I have no sense of Greer as an individual. You're saying he's very serious. I refuse to take anybody who works for the Trump administration seriously. But beyond that, what's your sense of the guy?
Yeah, I will say, like, very, very well respected by the trade bar of both parties in Washington, right? Very well respected by the staff at USGR. They probably have the best morale of any economic agency right now. They've been lending out staff to other people. Like, a lot of people have left the Commerce Department, right? The Bureau of Industry and Security, because they don't...
losing the trade war. What is happening?
Well, yeah. And so, but people at USGR, from everything I can tell, and I'm reporting out a Greer story right now. So some of this will hopefully be in the paper this weekend or something. But, a lot of them are like, well, we didn't really do a lot of trade negotiations under Biden at all. We did some kind of ephemeral Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Forum, whatever. But they feel like they're back in the game. These are trade negotiators, and they want to go out and get concessions from countries for U.S. companies, and they've been able to do that. So even, people are exhausted because they're doing so much, and it's not a big agency at all. But Greer himself, very dry personality, very observant Mormon, family guy, kind of gruff, polite, but can be a little spiky. I think he's just getting a little crankier as I think he gets more fatigued, right? And I should say, this is someone who I had known during the Biden administration. We used to talk a lot. He doesn't really pick up my phone calls anymore, such is life. But I certainly felt like there was a good mutual respect there, at least at one point, and certainly know that he reads the paper and reads all of the trade coverage. I think he knows what he's doing. He's wanted to do this for a long time. This was Bob Lighthizer, remember the first term USTR. He was Bob's chief of staff. Really kind of, that's his mentor. He's the Bob Lighthizer acolyte. And he's going around kind of doing a similar, maybe a somewhat less colorful way of Bob Lighthizer, you know what I mean? He's just a little bit more of a drier personality. But sometimes he's gotten a little spikier in recent weeks. He came up to me at a congressional hearing and tapped me on the shoulder during a recess and says, Gavin, your China sources are always wrong. And I'm surprised because he was in the back room where we can't go. I said, what? He's like, yeah, they're always wrong. It just just turns tail and like walks away into the back room where I can't follow him. And I had to go up to one of his staffers and be like, what the hell was that? And he's like, well, you know, your sources are always wrong. They didn't like this thing that I did with Ling Wei, our China reporter based in New York, about how they had done an about face on China and their trade policy. They tried to coerce them, they couldn't, and now they're playing really nice. So they're very, very touchy about that stuff right now. I think because they know that they're really up against it. Things are not delivering on most of the promises and the most important promises that they made. They've got some things that they can point to and they say everything's just coming around the corner, but it's tough. They broke it and now they've bought it in terms of the global trading system, and they're finding it a little bit more difficult to reassemble, and I think they thought they would.
Well, we invite you on with the premise of doing a postmortem on the trade war, essentially. The idea was I was mad that everybody was letting the trade war stuff go as we were all fixated, rightfully so, on the Strait of Hormuz. But it sounds like big picture, you're saying, no, not so. We're gearing up for round two.
I think so, yeah. Typically, they do either a kinetic war or an economic war, but not both at the same time, or at least not at the same intensity. That's just been my experience in the last 18 months. And obviously, there's trade elements with the Strait of Hormuz, but I think that as they try to wind that down, who knows if they can, but as it reaches kind of a lower level of conflict, you're going to see them start to go back in and do some trade stuff as well. So we've got USMCA, we've got these tariff investigations. It's going to be a busy summer.
All right. Well, Gavin, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to Is It Bad for the Economy? Please check us out. Give us that review. Give us that 5-star rating and show it to your family, friends. And Gavin, we'll have to have you back on soon.
Soon. Thanks, Kobe.
It felt so awkward without Banker Bill. It's the first time this has happened.